to register. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to have you again on the Forgotten Crops Society dialogues. For our second dialogue, we're hosting Professor Rita Mumm. On our first dialogue, we've hosted the Chef Pierre Thiam, and he had a very stimulating and extremely interesting discussion about fonio. Today, the angle is a bit different. We are going to talk about the promises of genetics and genomics in forgotten crops or underutilized crops. And we have the pleasure to have today the Professor Rita Mumm. So Professor Mumm is a maize breeder by training, and she has an extensive career in crop improvement that goes all the way through industrial seed production development, academic research, and plant breeding education. And she had developed pioneering biotechnological seed solutions at her lab and high throughput molecular marker system for genomic information in seed production in the 90s. And later on, she led the establishment of systems for transgenic product development for cotton, wheat, and rice at Syngenta. And she had also joined the University of Illinois to establish the Illinois Plant Breeding Center. And she also led the National Association of Plant Breeders in the United States. And she currently serves as the director for education programs in the African Orphan Crops Consortium. So as I said, Dr. Mumm holds a PhD in genetics and plant breeding and also a BS in agricultural science from the University of Illinois. And she has many patents around that and a very rich career. So we found no better person to talk about the promises of genetics and genomics in forgotten crops than Professor Mumm. So Rita, thank you for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure to have you today. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in the beginning, this dialogue was supposed to be moderated by our colleague, Professor Moez Amri, who's a plant breeder and geneticist from the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic. And unfortunately, he has some health issues. I hope he gets well very soon. He might join us later if he can, but otherwise I'll act on his behalf and ask you a few questions to stimulate the dialogue. So Rita, thank you. I understand that you have a presentation, so please feel free to share your presentation with us. And yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Recording.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'm going to do some finagling here. When you have more than one monitor, sometimes it's a good thing, and sometimes it's a challenge. Okay, good. So thank you so much, Michelle, for the very kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be here today and to be speaking with you about genomics and genetics for underutilized crops. And I'll be talking mainly from my role in capacity development and mobilization for the African Orphan Crops Consortium, and as my role in a director of the African Plant Breeding Academy, which is an initiative of the AOCC. So before we get rolling, I'd just like to acknowledge fonio as being one of the crops of the AOCC, as is sesame, and I love this picture here up on the screen of sesame. So we all understand that a large portion of the world is undernourished. And particularly, this is an issue in Africa and Asia, where in 2020, it was estimated that about 1 out of 5 people in Africa faced hunger. That's more than double the proportion of any other region. And you put that in the context of expectations for the population of Africa to quadruple in this century, and you see the situation that's it's urgent. It's absolutely urgent that people have the nourishment they need for well-being and a healthy life.
Recording in progress.
So if you look at, for example, the prevalence of stunting, you know, one of the manifestations of malnutrition in children, the prevalence is very high in Africa. If you look across the world, in fact, Africa and Asia have the most severe prevalence of stunting. 1 in 4 children in Africa on average is affected by this. And this has consequences not only for the individual, but for the community, for the economic growth of countries. The impact is profound. So the African Orphan Crop Consortium was founded in 2011 with the mission to end chronic hunger and malnutrition, eradicate stunting in Africa through year-round access to locally available nutritious food for daily dietary diversity that will break this intergenerational cycle of nutrient deficiency, where malnourished mothers give birth to malnourished children that grow up to continue this awful cycle. So the African Orphan Crop Consortium has a couple of overarching missions. One was to, first of all, identify crops that have this potential to be locally available and provide year-round diversity and nutrition in the human diet. And so we looked to crops that are indigenous to Africa, traditional to Africa, not introducing new foods, but rather improving the availability and the abundance of foods that communities across the continent enjoy eating. And so as a scientist, this means plant breeding to me, plant breeding to the rescue. And so our goal has been to sequence and annotate the genomes of 100 traditional, highly nutritious African food crops, and then to equip African plant breeders to be able to utilize this information in the development of improved crop varieties that meet the needs of farmers, consumers, and other stakeholders in the various value chains for these crops. This is an uncommon collaboration. So we have more than 30 partners in the consortium, and you can see from the logos that this truly is an uncommon collaboration. First of all, the African Union and NEPAD, the African Union Development Agency, has signed on to this very important partner because the Council of Presidents of the African Union endorses what we as a consortium are doing and basically endorsing our mission. We have other partners that contribute to the educational aspects, to the sequencing aspects, to the development of tools to use sequence information, development of tools to develop the sequence information, and various tools that would be used by plant breeders to actually put genomics into action. So our webpage is located www.africanorphancrops.org. And you come to this page, which I'm going to put up on the screen here quickly. And you can see that all the 100 crops that have been identified actually by scientists, by social scientists, by those that work in the food systems across Africa, they are listed here. And you can see that some of them are vegetables, some of them are trees, some of them are grains, and just a very wide variety of nutritious crop. And you can see that they would also have very different production needs and times of the year that they would be grown, etc. As I mentioned, fonio is one. I really have been very excited to learn about the Forgotten Crop Society because I really haven't been aware that there were other groups that had the same mission as we do in AOCC to actually develop these nutritious crops that have so much tremendous value in providing nutrition across the world. So here is one example, Moringa. It's a small tree. It can grow in very high stress situations under low rainfall. The leaves are edible, the pods are edible, and actually the seed oil is also used in cosmetics so that you can look beautiful while you're eating at the dining table. Just a joke. You can see that the crop is a very good source of protein, calcium, iron, zinc, B vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, you know, some of the many nutrients that are lacking in diets in various communities. So when we first started back in 2011, the question came up, okay, you're going to sequence 100 crop genomes. Now, how does this actually make a difference in dealing with food security and nutritional security? Well, the answer is that the information, the sequence information, to be useful has to actually get into the hands of the plant breeder that would use it to be more efficient in developing crops that meet farmers' needs, consumer needs, you know. So we're talking about not only traits like yield, but traits like nutrition, nutritional content, because we're really looking to support the smallholder farmer, you know, that oftentimes does not use a lot of inputs in their production. You know, we're really looking for great deal of stress tolerance to both abiotic and biotic stresses, resiliency to climate change. And so if this sequence information is going to be useful whatsoever and have any impact, it's got to be in resulting in varieties going out the door into the hands of farmers that would readily adopt them because they have the traits that they're looking for. And communities would buy the produce and consume the produce. And so a big focus of the AOCC is teaching plant breeders on how to use this genomic information to be better and faster in developing improved varieties. So we are empowering African scientists with knowledge, skills, and tools to be able to use genomic information in their breeding programs. So in terms of what's been done so far on the sequencing front, 12 crop genomes have been fully sequenced, annotated, they've been published. One of the policies of the AOCC is that all sequencing information is entirely in the public realm. And so these have been published, and the sequence information is available to whoever would like to use it. In addition, there's 40 other crops where sequencing is in progress. And among other members of the AOCC network, there's 28 more crops that are in progress with sequencing. So you can see the sequencing effort is well underway. And then in terms of training scientists, we've trained or are training 150 African scientists from 29 different countries. So we've graduated 112 scientists to date, and there's 40 that, because of COVID, we've been a little bit delayed, but we've been starting to actually deliver the content that we normally share across 6 weeks of very intense training in Nairobi, Kenya. We started to do some online work in sharing various concepts and then showing these concepts in application. I'm really proud to report that of the 150 African scientists, 40% are women, 91% are PhDs, and these individuals are working with more than 105 crops. So some of the crops they're working on are not necessarily those that are among the 100 orphan crops that we've listed. We actually, you know, because a scientist well-trained in cultivar improvement can basically work on any crop. These are scientists from national programs that are working to develop some crop for their country. Often they are the only person in the country, the only scientist in that national program working on their particular crop. So just bringing these individuals together creates a sense of community that we didn't really appreciate how important that effect was going to be. But bringing these individuals together, they have just done amazing things through their own interaction, including the formation of the African Plant Breeders Association, which just, by the way, held its second meeting, and over 600 scientists attended either in person or online to that week of meetings and conferences. So they've developed this community of practice, sharing ideas and reinforcing what each other are doing, and truly in the spirit of the scientific community, where the work of each other, the work of others is being built upon and keeps growing, rather than work being done in isolation and not so much available for other scientists to benefit from the results. Altogether, there's over 185 breeding programs that are focused specifically on orphan crops, and 55 different orphan crops are represented in among that collection of breeding programs. So in addition to training plant breeders, we have a new initiative that's coming on board, and that is to develop another very intensive 6-week course. This one would be focused on molecular scientists that would be working together with plant breeders to create the traits that farmers, consumers, and stakeholders need. And so we're looking at gene editing as a means for creating some of these very important necessary traits. And for those of you that aren't so familiar with gene editing, CRISPR is one of the approaches to gene editing. And we'll be teaching that particular approach in the course. Again, we feel this is really a direct strike for nutrition and will also create an explosion of innovation across Africa, which is also very important to eliminating poverty, which is so strongly connected with malnutrition. Why CRISPR? Well, it really has tremendous promise in making crops more productive and more nutritious. So it's a very precise tool genomically. The DNA sequence has to be known, so it plays off of the sequence information that's already been generated by the consortium. And it allows for traits like disease resistance, like nutritional content, like shelf life, those traits that are not controlled by oh so many genes, but yet are very important, particularly to consumers and to farmers. And to get these changes, these traits available in a way that's efficient, so it's fast and it's not so expensive. We've seen papers come out that talk about how CRISPR and gene editing in general is very well aligned with smallholder markets and traditional crops serving Pan-Africa, because the development costs, unlike let's say GM crops, for example, genetically modified crops, gene edited crops are not expensive to deregulate compared to all that goes into creating a GM crop. And so, so we really feel as though the promise is tremendous with CRISPR. What we're really looking to do is to build out these crop improvement teams. So we've trained the plant breeders that, basically the individuals that create the breeding populations, develop progeny, evaluate those progeny for the traits that are in the product target. And this is an opportunity to really, again, empower the scientists in Africa to be able to develop sources of the traits that are so badly needed, including those nutritional traits. Obviously, we're also looking with this to work with scientists and national programs that are in countries where there's a strong probability that genetically edited traits can be commercialized and have impact. We've been endorsed with this initiative by the African Union and its President's Council, which in a preliminary way does open the door to countries considering from a biosafety point of view the evaluation of these materials for commercialization. So again, I present the whole consortium and really with the thought of highlighting our goal for impact. This is not about a training program. It's about a program to help deliver nutrition to the African continent. And so with that, yeah, I'm happy to take any questions or.
Thank you, Rita, for this nice presentation. I was informed that we have been joined by Professor Amri. I appreciate him joining us in spite of him having some issues. Moez, if you're here.
Yes, I am here, but with somehow new look. Sorry, Rita, for being late.
Oh, I'm glad you're okay. I'm just glad you're okay.
No, just I had like a headache, and then I asked my colleague Manal to give me like some medicines, and then I took. But by chance, I was like allergic to that, so I look like more fat than.
Anyhow, it's fine.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Yes, Moez,
yes,
the floor is
you.
yours, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry for being late. I missed part of your presentation, but it was interesting to see what you are doing and what was done, and then what you are also planning to do with these orphan as Michel said, we don't like to say orphan because it's somehow hidden, but then forgotten underutilized crops. It is always good to see that the scientific committees, or let's say scientific community is giving more and more interest to these underutilized forgotten crops, and then what you are doing is really very interesting. But when we come to the today, what we call like the challenges, and then what we are talking about food and nutritional security, which are global challenges. So to meet these challenges, I think it would be more strategic to focus on major crops than staple food crops than the orphan ones. So or why you choose to work on these underutilized, let's say, minor, forgotten, orphan, local, and traditional crop species? And do you think that working on these crops is the way forward to answering to these global challenges when it comes to the food and nutritional security challenges?
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent question. You know, actually, in my opinion, you know, we're talking about helping to enhance the diets of individuals that rely on staple crops. So the cornerstone of their diet is a cereal crop or more, one or more cereal crops. You know, wheat, corn, rice, particularly. And so I'm not at all, we're not at all opposed to continuing genetic work to improve those crops and develop varieties that are locally adapted and provide the traits that local communities are looking for. But clearly, human beings cannot live solely on cereal crops. And so looking at the full range of nutrition that's required for a healthy diet to sustain well-being, it's imperative to build out that diet with fresh produce. So, you know, whereas the grains, you know, you can grow them, they store very well, right? So they're available year round, but it's the fresh produce part, the vegetables kind of thing that's not necessarily available all year round. They could be much more available through, let's say, small changes that result in different maturity or the ability to grow during more than one season per year. And so we're looking to build out the diet and make sure that it's supplemented with all the nutrients that people need to be healthy. And orphan crops can certainly provide that. In fact, this isn't our idea of which crops should be worked on. This was the list of 100 was actually compiled through a survey of more than 105 individuals in different aspects of the food system in Africa. So these were crops that they felt were important in terms of nutrition, in terms of economic benefit. And so building on that and trying to make these foods more available to a larger population. That's what we're all about.
Thank you. It's interesting because now shifting from this food security concept to what we call nutritional security, we should focus more on the nutritional value, and then targeting these orphan underutilized crops is one of the pillars to go forward. But then we should continue to work on how to increase or improve this nutritional quality for the staple food. And then your maize breeder, maybe biofortification from the genetic side of would be also, you know, that for improving, or we are at the genetic gain, a plateau of genetic gain for the major food crops when it comes to cereal especially. So I think we should move from these to improve somehow as breeders, I could say, the nutritional value. But then, yes, it is interesting, and then you have this background of breed, and then you are breeder, and then you was working a lot on maize and maybe other species. But then when it comes to the forgotten crops, do we really need to breed them? Because they were always there. So with these community, and they were used as they are now. And then maybe if we come with breeding, they will like. Are we going to do or to change, or maybe we don't need to breed them and then just to characterize and then keep as they are now? So my question is, do we need to breed these crops or crop species?
So as a plant breeder, you know my answer is going to be yes, right? But let me give you some specifics as to why. You know, one of the crops on the African Orphan Crop list is teff, a grain grown in Ethiopia, right? It's very nutritious, and it's a very important food crop in Ethiopia. It has a problem, like many crops that have not been subject to genetic improvement in any way. It has a problem with shattering. So shattering, so the pod that holds the grain breaks open before the harvest takes place. And so actually it's estimated that 50% of the yield is lost because of shattering. Well, I'm sure if you might be familiar with the shattering problem in other crops and how it's been solved. Yeah. And you know, generally it's 3 genes or less. 3 genes, not so hard to change. And so, but it's changed through plant breeding. Actually, in the wild, it's a benefit to have pod shatter. Why? Because then in the wild, the seeds are disseminated, and then they have a chance to grow in the next growing cycle. And so in many crops, pod shatter has been a trait that's been developed by evolution and adaptation. But we'd like to change that when the farmer comes along, because the farmer wants to harvest all at one time. And so that's just one example, you know, and I can give you example after example of disease resistances that are needed. I can give you examples in almost every crop of the need for drought tolerance, you know, and we're not talking about taking a crop that, you know, cannot grow at all in dry conditions. We're talking about enhancing the plant's own ability to deal with periods when there's not rainfall. And so, again, this requires plant breeding because otherwise in the wild, you'd have to have successive years of drought and natural selection, which isn't always going to happen or takes forever, right? Mm-hmm. People need nutritious food now. So plant breeding is, to me, a very important aspect of the solution.
Yes, I do agree, but at some point, yes, but maybe with a specific action for some specific crop species, I do agree. But then I think farmers, they kept these varieties, and then, by the way, they were doing in somehow selection and breeding, but using like very classical things. But then now talking about breeding, because, you know, in the milestone of plant breeding, we went from the classical breeding up to the breeding for like cross breeding, and then hybrid breeding, mutation breeding, marker assisted breeding, and then genomic breeding coming at the end to the gene editing and precision breeding. But then going through all these milestones for breeding, which level should we, but which like approach should target first these underutilized crop species? Should we start and then follow the same flow, or directly go into this gene editing? As I joined, I was connected when you were talking about CRISPR-Cas as technology. So maybe we should start with simple or somehow classical, or somehow mix it in terms of breeding approach. But then going directly to these CRISPR-Cas seems to be very somehow cannot fit with these underutilized crops at least at this moment. So what do you think?
Yeah. So I maybe didn't emphasize enough that we really have started with building very strong pipelines with traditional plant breeding practices in these and all the crops that the scientists in the African Plant Breeding Academy are working. So in my mind, it starts with a product target. So what do your farmers need? What do your consumers need? What do stakeholders, if there's processors involved, let's say, what do other stakeholders, what traits do they need in terms of an improvement over what's available now? And what are the problems that they're dealing with? Because I always think of plant breeding as it's solution-based. It's meant to solve problems, not create more problems. And so developing, first of all, that product target, you know, what's needed and for where. You know, it's not going to be a one size fits all that, you know, in this particular crop, it's going to feed this variety will feed the world. No, we know G by E exists. And so we're looking at well-defining the product target and the target market, where these things will be grown, in other words, is what I mean by market, target production area. And then, you know, looking at how you actually design a system that's going to result in an improved variety that has those traits, and has those traits in the amounts that are needed by the farmers, consumers, and other stakeholders in the value chain. And so, you know, this is basically traditional plant breeding, right? You choose, you know, plant breeding is simple. You choose the best parents, you create progeny, you evaluate the progeny, and you identify one that's more superior than either of the parents, right? And so it's a simple concept, but it doesn't work out so simply in application. So, you know, big questions: what are the best parents? What ways will you use to evaluate the progeny for the traits that are in your product target? And how do you deal with the fact that when you evaluate a set of materials, you know, one is the best at this location, but a different one is the best at this location? How do you deal with questions like that? And actually, the more that we know, not only about the phenotypes, the physical expression of performance, but the more we know about the genetic control of that performance, the more we can be effective in actually delivering the traits that the stakeholders want. And so it's all about serving the stakeholders. You know, it's not improvement just for improvement's sake. It's what do the stakeholders need? And so it starts with that. But, you know, I think of things like marker-assisted breeding, you know, identifying genes that are associated with the trait. I think of that as a technology that you plug in to that pipeline that's based on, you know, traditional plant breeding. You plug it in where it can be the most effective and also give you the best value for the investment, because it costs more to involve technology, right? There's always a trade-off. Are you going to have more testing plots, or are you going to have some of that funding go to marker genotypes so that you can make selections based on markers as well as based on phenotype, or using them together? So it's there's no right formula for this. You know, it really depends on the traits that are needed and desired by farmers, consumers, and other stakeholders, at the biology of the crop. I mean, obviously, if you're breeding a tree crop, there's going to be some differences to breeding a vegetable crop, right? I mean, and so you really have to fit the product pipeline and the elements that get plugged into that product pipeline, you know, in a very objective kind of way. And this is why we train in the African Plant Breeding Academy, why we help the national scientists to make these kinds of decisions for their programs, you know.
Okay. So I think we have many questions, so people are asking questions, and then I think better to move the questions. So I will start by the first question from from Francisca. How do we ensure these crops have a market and do not become elite, like produce produce it for only few consumers, raising the price in their native countries? So this was one question, and then but because we have like time is running, and then maybe better to go like very specific, and then not to be long for the answer, and then it will at least we will be able to take the questions that we have now.
Okay, so the question is, how do you make sure that the product is going to be needed? There's going to be a market there. And I think this goes back to what I was saying about identifying a product target. So that, you know, implies that you're getting, the plant breeder is understanding what is the market, you know, defining what that market is. And hopefully through the development of improved varieties, that market will grow. It's not, it's a dynamic thing. It's not a static thing. So it's something that has to be reassessed all the time, in my opinion.
Yes, I could say the market is there because these crops are there. So the market is with these local people. So it is somehow just be specific and not to go to make it like as measure. The second question is from Abi, and then he's asking, what about teaching farmers strategies for improving breeding, or doing breeding themselves? So I think they were doing already. So when selecting these like these crop species over these like years, I think they were doing selection or breeding without. But what do you think about that?
Yeah. So actually, in order to be eligible for the African Plant Breeding Academy, the 150 scientists that have been involved have to be active plant breeders. So they have to be actively managing a plant breeding program. So of course they're doing something already.
But he's talking more about like farmers.
Oh, okay. I must not have understood the question. I'm sorry.
Well, I think the question is about teaching farmers. First, Abi is the she.
Oh, okay.
What is about teaching farmers strategies for improving breeding themselves rather than doing, I guess, the training the breeders, you know, going a step further down. This is as far as I understand Abby's question.
Oh, gotcha. You know, this is a very important issue. It's a very important issue. We have not gotten to dealing with that particular issue as yet. And in fact, when I speak with national scientists of different programs, oftentimes it's the plant breeder that goes out and talks to the farmer and explains, you know, the best production practices for this particular variety to maximize its genetic potential. And that's a lot of responsibility on the plant breeder. You know, I think there's a definite need for agronomists that that help the farmers to understand how they can maximize the genetic potential that's there in their varieties.
Okay, thank you. We have like hand raised. Maybe we can go to Henry. He has a question, so please.
Yes. Hello, Prasad.
I'm Prasad. Hi, Rita. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Nice to see you, and thanks for a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you answered most of them. I just have some few points to add on to your answers.
Great.
The first question was about, do we really need to breed the orphan crops or neglected crops? So you answered most of them, like, yes, the farmers eventually needs, it's all about the economy of production. So it's all about getting money. So we have to reach a place, a point of productivity where now farmers start getting money over their investment, which is not there. That's why we call it as a subsidiary farmers. So they're not reaching there at the moment. So we need to reach there. That's the first point. Second point, apart from stress and yield, most of these orphan crops, they have not been bred through a proper channel. So it's more like involuntary selections which are happening, or not really a true directional selection. So many of them do have these anti-nutritional qualities.
Yeah.
They also have some unwanted notes when you eat them. So when you eat them, notes, flavor.
Oh, okay.
Unwanted notes of that. I have actually worked on coffee, so I the notes, when you have something, you get those notes at the end when you eat. So it's an experience of eating. I can give you an example. We work on a crop called Solanum ethiopium. It's called African eggplant. It's like a normal eggplant. It's just like a brinjal. But when you eat that, it has got a little bitter note toward the end. And it's quite prevalent crop in Tanzania, Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, and eastern part of Africa. But when you talk with the people who are selling, the younger generation they don't want to prefer that crop because of that bitter note.
Flavor is one of the hardest things to breed for, because flavor is so subjective. And, one audience doesn't necessarily think the same thing, like you're saying, yes. Young versus old.
So Moez, I'm answering your question, which you started in the beginning, why we need to breed orphan and neglected crops. So I'm adding on to what Rita answered you. Okay. So first one, what I told was to reach a level of economic returns, because yield is what is going to give them returns. So that's why we definitely need to breed for yield. Second answer I'm giving is about the anti-nutritional and the unwanted notes, the flavors and aromas, which are not desirable for the present generation. Because if you want to sell it in the market, the people should buy that. And most of these are very easy to deal targets. Most of these anti-nutrients and unwanted flavors and aroma, they target specific biochemical pathway. So it's easy to target them. So that's why we definitely need to breed for them, for having new markets. Second question was about how to deal with the elitism involved with the orphan crops, like what happened with the quinoa of Latin America. We should not want that happening to other orphan crops. So the people who are eating them, they stop eating and they start selling for making money. So that's what happened in quinoa in Latin America. So that is elitism of the product. So why? It's something which goes beyond plant breeding. So it involves the government policies and strategies to be in place. For example, if we look for some of the Western African countries, they have strict control on the pricing of certain products which they consider elite in the region, like for cocoa.
Okay.
So Ghana won't allow cocoa to be sold below a certain price.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank you. Maybe we should move to go to for more questions. So
yes,
from our from the audience. So the other question is, yes, besides the breeding itself, this is from Matthew. So besides the breeding itself, development of seed system to efficiently producing and delivering high quality seeds of improved genetic material to farmers is quality. It was more comment than question, I think, and then he's raising the problem of seed quality for this. So there is another maybe question from Martha Jones. So I applaud the aim to gave for of ensuring these crops genetic data are publicly available. How difficult is that to achieve? So thinking of companies' potential aspiration to patent that and other maybe information.
Yeah, thank you. It's our position in the African Orphan Crop Consortium that all information that's generated by the consortium is freely available. So while we may have a partner, a private industry partner that might be sequencing something, that's their work aside from the African Orphan Crop Consortium, perhaps. Although, you know, we're working with partners that are willing to have the sequence information out there. And we're working with different institutions that do the annotation. So the University of Ghent, for example, has been doing quite a bit of the annotation. BGI, Chinese genomics company, has been doing a great deal of the sequencing. And so it's all partners that are willing to actually contribute to publicly available information.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Hamza Qahi. So he said, So from Khair, so he said that there are quite a number of forgotten crops. Are you planning to work on all of them, or to focus on some of these, or the some of more common and important ones? Like he's talking about economical maybe point of view. So. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. You know, as you can see, we've finished a number of genomes so far, and there's a great deal of sequencing in progress, but we haven't started necessarily all of the genomes yet. So there is some prioritization that's taking place, and you can also see that there's going to be challenges based on some genomes that are very huge, for example, or highly polymorphic, or you know, there can be a number of reasons why one crop is actually prioritized over another. But in addition to the reference genome that will be created, we also plan to sequence 100 representatives of those of the genetic diversity of that crop that's present in Africa. So, you know, for that, we're also that's also a work in progress, and we're looking to plant breeders that are part of the African Orphan Crop Consortium to point to which materials would be good for basically characterizing the genetic diversity within each of the orphan crops. Prasad Andre, who just spoke a little bit earlier, I'm not sure if you all know him, but he leads the AOCC lab in Nairobi. And Prasad, would you like to add anything about the current state of sequencing of the orphan crop list?
Yeah, so we have done the 12 what you have listed. Then we have the list on this website. Sorry, I just started my answering in the last session. I did not introduce myself because I thought there's not enough time. So I manage the AOCC Genomics Lab which is hosted by World Agroforestry ICRAF in Nairobi. And we have sequenced those 12 crops. You can see the information in the web link just I have sent in the chat. Rather than me explaining it in detail. So we started with in fact ion proton, which was not really which didn't go very long. Then we started with Illumina. Then we ventured into PacBio. We have 2 genomes done with PacBio, and now we have Oxford Nanopore, which is installed in our lab, and we have now joined. We are using the Oxford Nanopore. That's how the technology has moved. And as Rita told, we are sequencing 100 accessions per species for understanding the diversity between present in the populations, which will be used for making the SNP chips, or, I mean, it's all out there. People can use the way they want to use it.
Again, I have a question. So I remember that one time I was like defending one crop, mandate crop for CG centers as I was working with CG before. And then at that time I was defending the crop. Maybe there is globally 800 millions eating this crop. But then when I was defending, like the guy, he asked me, how many people they are eating fababine? And then at that time I said, maybe there is 800 millions. But he said, for me, I focus on wheat because there is 7 billion and more than 7 billion people are eating. Today, when we talk about like genomic engineering or genetic engineering, so far and these technology, they contributed a lot in improving or overcome some challenges for the big crops or major crops. Now taking this into consideration, so how many millions are like dependent on these underutilized orphan crops? Do you think that going with these genetic engineering things for underutilized crop, I think it is somehow we need more to invest in these major crops to target more people than going to invest with such high technology as CRISPR-Cas, for example, with underutilized crops. So at the end, we will invest, we put a lot of investment working on this CRISPR-Cas, but then how many millions at the end will be targeting for this, if we are going to improve? So this may be a question that need to ask, and then I don't know what would be your answer, please.
Yeah, you know, in my mind, it's not a one or the other. You know, we should be working on both the staple crops and the orphan crops. You know, I don't know about you, but if I sit down to the table and I just have a plate of rice, you know, I'm going to be filled up, but I'm not going to have all the nutrients that I need from that meal to even absorb all of the nutrition that's in the rice.
Just here one small comment. So just I'm not like to eat these major crops or staple food crops or underutilized. I'm eating both, but then for breeding using these advanced genetic engineering technologies, it is better to invest on these staple food crops because it's costly, and then keep working on like somehow like standard or classical breeding approach, then going with CRISPR-Cas for these orphan crops. This is my question, and not to choose between this or that. So this was my question.
Yeah, I think actually the you know, if we were talking about genetically modified orphan crops, I would say no, because they're so expensive to develop and deregulate. But gene-edited crops are actually particularly suited for smaller markets. And I think also really give Africa the chance to be at the forefront of innovation in agriculture. I'm a proponent of the national programs choosing their priorities and then providing assistance to those national programs to achieve what they desire, that they want. So if they feel as though a particular trait is important, let's say, it's increased iron, and they would like to bring more sources of iron into the diet. And so, a big part of the breeding with orphan crops can be not only biofortification, it can be upregulation of nutritional aspects that are already there. But it's also, as Prasad mentioned, getting rid of anti-nutritional components. And so, if you take most legume crops are good sources of iron, but many of them do also have anti-nutrient properties. And so, again, these anti-nutrients are not controlled by so many genes. They would actually be a fairly, I'm saying this generally speaking without a specific example, but generally it would be a good target for gene editing because you can interrupt the pathway of that anti-nutrient. And if there's not so many pathways involved, so many genes involved, it's actually an efficient target perhaps for gene editing versus the longer time that it would take to actually breed that out.
Thank you very much, Rita. So it was a really nice interaction with you. I don't know, I will give the floor to Michelle, maybe if there are no other questions. So Michelle, the floor is yours. Thank you, Rita, again. It was nice to interact with you, and then the discussion, I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. And I really appreciate this forum where there can be an exchange of ideas. And I commend the Forgotten Crops Society for their focus on these kind of crops. As I read over the material on your website, I see that your intentions and your mission is very much aligned to the African Orphan Crop Consortium. And so I really would like to see us work together in the future. So I leave that there with an open door to discuss in the future how we might interact together and work together.
Thank you so much, Rita. And first of all, thank you, Moez, for joining in spite of your health issues. And thank you, Rita, for the interesting debate and for opening up the question to other disciplines. As I said, the Forgotten Crops Society is a multidisciplinary society. It gathers people. If you look at the list of the founding members, they are coming from different disciplines. It's quite interdisciplinary, and we believe that to bring more attention to these crops, we need people from various backgrounds and different capacities to bring those back into the plate. That's the ultimate goal. And as you rightly mentioned, it's not about one or the other. It's about working on both the forgotten and the less forgotten one. And I mean, on behalf of the society, I really thank you for accepting our invitation. And it was an interesting, very interesting debate. So our website is still under construction. It's for the time being, we're starting small, but it will it will be coming in the next few months, hopefully. So thank you again for this second dialogue that we have organized. It is going to be probably our last dialogue for this year. So thank you, Rita, again. And please stay tuned for our next dialogue organized. It will be probably organized in 2022. And I seize the opportunity in wishing you all a happy new year 2022. May it be better than 2021 and above all COVID-free, so we can travel and meet physically again. And we hope, as I said, in the name of the Forgotten Crop Society, I really I'm quite keen, together with Francesca and other colleagues, on developing networks and mutual collaboration with the African Orphan Crops Consortium and other initiatives that deal with those forgotten crops. So thank you again. Thank you, everyone. And see you soon, next year, probably, Francesca. and we'll meet again on a different subject, but also always around these forgotten crops. So they are not forgotten anymore. Thanks again, and have a nice evening or a nice day wherever you are on the planet. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.